My name is Amelia Feiner, and I am the Assistant Director of Content for the International Conference. We're super excited that you're all here, and I'm really honored to present our first keynote speaker, Mr. Edward Felsenthal. I'm going to do a quick introduction, and then we're going to get started and hopefully have an interesting conversation. Mr. Edward Felsenthal is the editor-in-chief and CEO of Time magazine. He is the 18th top editor since Time's founding in 1923. Under Felsenthal's leadership, Time has grown from a magazine and website into a global media company with a vastly expanded suite of products and platforms, returned to growth with its highest year-over-year revenue increases in well over a decade, and increased the impact, relevance, and reach of its world-class journalism. Today, in addition to its iconic magazine and digital platforms reaching 100 million people around the world, Time includes an Emmy Award-winning film and television division, Time Studios, a fast-growing global live events business built around its Time 100 and Person of the Year franchises, an industry-leading Web3 division, an award-winning branded content studio, the website-building platform Time Sites, and the sustainability and climate action program CO2.com, and more. A native of Memphis, Felsenthal graduated from Princeton University. He has a JD from Harvard Law School and a master's in law and diplomacy from the Fletcher School at Tufts. He is admitted to the bar in the District of Columbia and Tennessee. Everyone, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Felsenthal.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So we're gonna get started. We're just gonna have a casual conversation up here, and then we're gonna open it up to Q&A at the end. But I'm gonna start off by asking about the theme of this year's conference. We're really interested in focusing on community and business. And so we wanna ask about, how do you try to foster community at the Time organization, among your readership and the broader world? How does it align with Time's mission and your role?
That's a great question and actually prompts one from me. I'm curious, thinking about building our community, our global community, how many of you, prior to this lovely introduction, had heard of Time? So pretty much everybody, 70%, 80%. How many of you grew up with the magazine in your home? Okay. What do you think that is? 30%?
Yeah,
A third. How many of you have encountered our brand, I don't know, in the last 6 months? Okay, pretty good, maybe half. That's super encouraging for me, and if we had 10 more minutes, I'd have a whole survey, questionnaire for you about, have you been to our event? Have you seen one of our documentaries on Netflix? Have you read us on Apple News? Have you encountered us on Twitter? We're on TikTok, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. That's how we think about our community. We have, I think, we have an advantage and a challenge. The advantage is that we have a globally known brand. There aren't that many of them. Pretty much anywhere you go in the world, anywhere I go in the world, and I ask that first question, I ask you, do you know the brand? Everybody says yes. I was in Seoul before the pandemic and had a business meeting at a company there, and then I was on my way to the airport after it, and an employee of the company in Seoul who did not speak English took me down to my taxi, and as I was getting in the car, she looked at me and she said, "Time?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "BTS." Because we had put BTS on the cover, and it was a phenomenal event in the region. And I think that's our gift, that we have this globally recognized brand. It stands for something. It stands for leadership. It stands for trust. our challenge is you're all interested in business, that every business is in a period of disruption. I'd put the disruption happening in our business up against the disruption happening in any business. Certainly, the business that I started in at the Wall Street Journal in 1992, 30 years ago, looks nothing like Time today. And our chief strategy in both seizing that advantage I described, but also fighting against the currents of evolution in our business model and change in the disruption in the media business, is to build on that community so that everybody who knows the Time brand can enter it from different ways. And so, yes, we still have a magazine. It's got 1.3 million subscribers around the world. It's the biggest print magazine in news in the US. Yes, we've got a website, but we have over the last few years leaned into our community in live events. We've built an NFT community called Timepieces. We've built a studio business, as I described. We've built a climate business we just launched a few months ago. We've built a branded content business, providing community and helping our customers tell their stories. So that's how we think about community as a business.
And so before your position now, you were in charge of the digital content at Time. So how do you think that the implementation of this pivot has worked? How have you overseen it, and how did your background help to drive it?
I have always loved, and I imagine many of you feel the same way, launching products. And I didn't start out that way. When I started at the Wall Street Journal in 30 years ago, I had a kind of a vision, I think, of where my career would go that looked not all that different than when I started. That it would be a certain path. I aspired to be a Washington reporter. I was a Washington reporter for a while. But I found very early in my career that I loved launching new products, taking the Wall Street Journal, a legacy brand, and where could it go? And so I launched something called Personal Journal at the Wall Street Journal. Still exists, more digital now than print, and some other new products at the Journal. And that then I left the Journal. I was there for 15 years. Management change, and I had kind of an option to stay in a scenario I wasn't that excited about, or take a risk and leave. And I embraced the risk and went and did a couple of purely digital startups. And I found that combination of legacy experience, legacy platform, and startup experience in a purely digital space was an incredible asset. As I came into Time 9.5 years ago, a company that talked a pretty good digital game, but really for so long the profits from print were so good and so reliable, even as they came down, that the transition had been slower than it should have been. And so when I arrived at Time in 2013, we were pretty much a weekly magazine. There was a website, but it was a little bit of an afterthought. I remember I had to write a long memo applying for the job, and I was on the site. It was like a Saturday night. I was on the site, and the lead story was about Lincoln. And I thought, well, important but not current. And we really leaned into the digital experience, the content, making it urgent, and really with the idea that the Time would do hour to hour what it had for nearly 90 years at that point, done every week. So it's a journey. We're still in it. We're now an independent company. We were part of a conglomerate of many different conglomerates, particularly in recent years. We were bought by individuals in 2018, and we're still in in the journey. But when 4 years ago, when our new owners bought us, probably 90% of our revenue came from print. Today, it's about 45. So so that's the path, and we're still on it. Made a lot of progress. Lot of work still to do.
So you mentioned that your business model has transformed. Over 25% of your revenue now comes from studios. Your relationship with your consumers is fundamentally changing because of the content that you're putting out is different. Do you think that the way that journalism brand like Time was associated with integrity and truth, is the relationship between your consumer and the brand changing because of these different strategies that you've been implementing under Mark Benioff in the past 4 years?
I don't think so. I hope not. You mentioned Mark, who's a phenomenal owner and brilliant business leader and advisor to all of us at our company. I think the value we first synced on with Mark and Lynn Benioff is trust. Salesforce, which is the company Mark founded, lists its core values, and number one is trust, and that's true for Time. The T stands for trust. And without it, what are we? It's really there was a period in media in the kind of 2008 to 2018, maybe 10 years, where the whole mindset was the digital startups are going to triumph, the legacy brands are dead. And I think we and many other legacy brands have, I think we all bought it, for a while, but we've proven it otherwise. And I think a lot of that is because that relationship you describe and ask about hasn't changed. That legacy, as in legacy media, maybe was a bad word in a way in 2012, and it's positive today. Not that we don't have our challenges around trust, but I think that's our core asset and the most valuable one we have. And the formats will change, but that can't and won't.
So on the topic of trust between media and consumers, we know that that's at an all-time low. What are your thoughts as the editor-in-chief of a leading publication in America and the world about content moderation and the shifting way that people consume and interpret what they read?
Well, I think the trust challenges in media, a million reasons, and a lot of things we and all of us in the media can do better, for sure. But in my mind, it's connected to declining overall trust in institutions. And, we're in Time, maybe the topic we've been most associated with we have our 100th birthday in March, is influence. Time is really it's been an arbiter of influence for 100 years. Who do we put on the cover? Who do we make Person of the Year? Who do we name to the Time 100? And the nature of influence has changed so dramatically. Part of that is because institutions have kind of gone this way, and you've had, through particularly social media, the opportunity, positive in many ways, negative in others, for individuals to emerge. I thought about this a lot. We made Greta Thunberg Person of the Year a few years ago. In an earlier era, somebody like that would never have had the influence that she's had because, today you got a phone, and you can, if you use it in a certain way, you can be heard. I think, to me, what is content moderation? I'm an editor. I'm a content moderator. I see tremendous value in content moderation. I think content moderation is existential. The whole discussion over Section 240 of the Communications Act of 1996, which allowed social media platforms to publish comments without liability, completely changed the nature of how information is spread. If I were to publish very much of what's on Twitter today, where the topic of content moderation is out in full force, I'd be sued. You know, we'd be out of business. And so I think this is a real challenge for us in our society as more and more communication shifts away from institutions like ours. That's fine. That's good. More people should have platforms. But regulating, monitoring the truthfulness, and not allowing platforms, in a way we never would, other platforms to be transmitters of hate and violence, you know, is real, one of the great issues of the moment.
You talked a little bit about, the power to influence, naming people of the year. Last year, you named Elon Musk Person of the Year, talking about misinformation, talking about moderation. Want to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, we named Musk. It's interesting. You look back at the Person of the Year. Time's 100 years old. Person of the Year is about, I think, 95 years old. First Person of the Year was Charles Lindbergh, which I'm told is because they got to the end of the year and realized they hadn't put Lindbergh, who had his famous flight that year, on the cover, and they invented this franchise to make up for that. If you look at who has been Person of the Year for many years, it's been political leaders. We talk about influence for good or for ill, right? Who influenced the year for good or for ill? It's been Stalin, it's been Hitler, it's been Churchill, it's been most presidents of the United States. It's also very often been major business leaders. It was Jeff Bezos, it was Mark Zuckerberg. We named Musk Person of the Year, seeing him as an emblem of a massive change in our society, the role of entrepreneurs, the incredible outsized influence of billionaires, of people who use social platforms the way he uses his social platforms, the divide in society, polarization across, the inequality around wealth. We just flouting of regulation. I mean, he emblemizes so much of what's happening in our society, some of it extraordinary. I spent a day at his space facility in Texas, when we were preparing that project, and stood underneath the rockets that SpaceX is building, and with him as he described the engineering of it in incredible detail. He's all of those things, and that's why we made him Person of the Year. We also like to think about Person of the Year as somewhat forward-looking. In an ideal case, the person is not just somebody who's been influential in the year that was, but whose influence will continue, and I think certainly that's happened in his case. We'll see how it all plays out. I thought obviously the Twitter business has been challenged for many years, and certainly it needed to change. The way these layoffs today are being carried out is pretty is pretty horrendous. He's got big challenges ahead of him in terms of right-sizing the business and how he navigates content moderation and hate speech and the needs of advertisers, many of whom are sitting on the fence waiting to see what happens. So he's going to remain a major story in content moderation and much else for a long time to come.
And not just at Twitter, but in the sector overall. How do you think that the politicization of media platforms themselves is going to affect media consumption?
Well, I think this is a topic that I think about constantly, and actually when we get to Q&A, I'd love to hear. You can ask questions, but I'd love to hear from some of you on it, because I think it's in many ways the biggest challenge we all face, which is certainly in our democracies, and as those democracies face growing challenges, that of course we're not going to agree on policies. Of course we're going to have divisions about the way forward, but we've come to a point where we can't even agree on facts. Back to Person of the Year. It's that time of year, so it's on my brain. In 2018, we named The Guardians in the War on Truth as Person of the Year, journalists around the world who were standing up for facts. And I think the polarization of media, the fact that that increasingly people all over the world, certainly in America, are getting their facts and perspective solely, in many cases, from platforms that share their point of view, is incredibly dangerous. At time, we try to, we have an interesting place in the world. We are global, which a lot of publications aren't, and a lot of networks and major media organizations aren't. We have readers, certainly of our magazine. We're not coastal. We've got readers all over America, and we have, we want to reach as many people as we can, while also standing up for core values that are really human values. And so it's how you speak to the widest audience possible, be a place for discussion and debate, and remain true to values like truth, is, I think, the biggest challenge we all face in this business. And I don't pretend to have the answer, but it's something we think about every single day.
And do you think that the increasing polarization of media, do you think that's affecting the business side of it as well? Do you see those things as intersecting, or do you see them as more disparate?
I think I see in our business, I certainly, I see it sometimes. I'll get letters. We made Donald Trump Person of the Year in 2016. There were letters. We made Joe Biden and Kamala Harris Person of the Year in 2020. Different letters. We certainly see people will cancel a subscription or tune out. I think that, and that was true at the Wall Street Journal in the 90s as well. I'm not seeing it affecting our business kind of holistically. I think part of that is because of what we talked about at the beginning, which is we're just connecting with consumers in so many different spaces and ways today. And you might find our documentary on the inspiration for Mission to Space on Netflix, or you might be part of our NFT community of artists, or you might come to our event in Dubai or Los Angeles, where we're bringing Time 100 leaders together across ideological spectrums and across fields. So I think, it's there. We think about it a lot in terms of our responsibility. How can we be a positive force in the world? But I would say it's having less of an impact on our business than maybe it is in some other places.
You talk about trying to have the biggest positive impact on the world. We see ESG being talked about more and more, and corporate responsibility. What is Time doing? Want to fill us in?
Well, I mentioned briefly, we just, in September at Climate Week in New York, we launched a new business called Time CO2, which is a platform to help particularly small and medium businesses that don't have access to giant consulting and other major firms that guide big companies to net zero. We've launched Time CO2 as a way to guide climate conscious people, climate conscious businesses toward net zero with information and portfolio of offsets that we are very excited about. It's just 3 months old. Corollary with that, we made our own net zero commitment as a company that we would be net zero in 2026. We've been making changes along the way, whether it's renewable paper in our magazines. We've changed the sourcing of our paper. The way we think about travel has changed. The way we think about our office facilities has changed. Some of that with the pandemic, but also, with an eye toward our own commitment to the planet. Time in our journalism was a very early, not early enough, but in terms of broader media, back to Person of the Year, I was in college, but Time made the Endangered Earth the Planet of the Year in the late 80s, and convened a conference, really one of the first global environmental conferences, major global environmental conferences, convening scientists from all over the world. Al Gore has become a powerhouse on this topic, was there also, in the late 80s, and we've dialed up our commitment to coverage of this existential crisis. So that we very much want to do our part, and we think of our mission today. We used to think of it as telling the stories of people who shape the world, and it still is, but it's also in our mind, what can we do to make that world a better one?
And so not just outside of in the world and outside of the office, but within the office, what are some, post-pandemic initiatives that have taken shape in the past few years to try to build up community?
Well, we're hybrid. Our offices were pretty empty for a long time. I know. I guess you had this conference last year, but maybe not.
It was hybrid as well.
It was hybrid last year, and in actually, a colleague of mine was on this stage, although I think it was a virtual stage, a Time colleague, in 2020, and I think it was totally virtual then. We've made that journey. We're on that journey. On a given day, we have space for about 170 people in our New York office, which is a few blocks from here, Bryant Park. And I'd say on any given day, we got 50 people. If we're serving pizza, it's 100. We're looking for ways to bring people together, food, meeting. We have a book club. We have our culture team got together, and in-office meetings. So we're looking for opportunities, whether it's celebratory or organized team meetings to get people back to the office, to build community. It's really important, and I think that'll continue. But we're hybrid for now. One I think permanent impact of the pandemic, other than the way we think about real estate and remote work and in-person work, is we saw massive increase in interest in our health coverage during the pandemic, and that has very much continued, and I think it opened a door for us at Time, where we've always been a publication in our magazine and on our website, about what to know, and we realized as people turned to us for guidance, trusted guidance, in that, particularly in those early months when we all knew so little, that we were also a place where people would turn to us for what to do, and so we've really leaned into that, and that's had I think, as I said, a permanent impact on our coverage and our business.
And you guys have been writing about this too while implementing it in your own lives, which I think is a really unique position to be in. So you have this future of work project that's, focusing on how the workplace is going to change in the coming years, but you're also living through it. So what's the biggest takeaway that you've found through that project on how companies will navigate this new world? This fits in theme with our conference last year.
Yeah. Again, a topic I'd love to hear from others about, because we don't pretend to have the answers and are working through it. I think that never say never, but I don't see any time in the immediate future where we're going to have a company-wide mandate. Everybody's got to be in the office all the time. Among other things, we've had, as every company has, people have moved. We try to support as much of that as we can. We're not a big company. We're 300 people, 320 people. We are global, but we're not everywhere. And setting up, having an employee in a place where you don't already have an employee is logistically complex and expensive. And so we're trying to, we've accommodated that when we can. So we're more scattered than we were. We have fewer offices than we did, physical offices. So I don't think we'll go back. On the other side of the spectrum, I do think that there's a cost, that we just miss out on. It's the reason you're all together here instead of virtual as you were 3 years ago, 2 years ago. There's real value in being with your colleagues and brainstorming with your colleagues and bonding with your colleagues and learning from your colleagues and mentoring your colleagues and getting reverse mentored by your colleagues. So I think that is crucial to our business and to business in general. And so we're very focused on, what is that? I wouldn't necessarily say it's a middle ground, but there's a ground somewhere in between the routines that I think is increasingly, it is closer to what it was pre-pandemic, though I don't see it getting back to where it was pre-pandemic. I'll never forget, we were in our news meeting, our daily news meeting at our offices in Bryant Park up the street. It was February of 2020, and some of our colleagues from our Asia offices were on the video call, and they were already closed. They were at home. And maybe they had just gone home, and somebody on the call said, "Greetings from the future." And sure enough, 2 weeks later, we were all at home. So what a few years it's been, and we've learned a lot, still learning.
And now, as we're just kind of emerging from that, we seem to be heading into some macroeconomic turmoil. As the economy seems poised for quite a large downturn, and the media industry may be bracing itself for shrinking ad spend, tighter budgets, layoffs, which we've already seen 3,500 of today. Any insights on how magazines like Time are, strategize to get through periods like that? How that will be different in the next few months than it's been before, maybe in 2007, 2008?
Yeah, this is, I think it feels new in some ways because it's been so long since we've had, that looked like we might go that way in 2020, and then for a number of reasons, including some that are fueling the inflation that's fueling some of the problems today, we didn't have a massive downturn, a long-term downturn from the pandemic. A lot of hardship and heartache, but not a long-term downturn. Here we are. It was inevitable. I've been doing this. This is my, depending on how you count, 30th or 34th year in this business, and I've seen a lot of ups and downs, a lot of tightened ad budget cycles, and I think what we and frankly a lot of other media companies have going for us today is we've learned some of the lessons of past downturns, and we've been in our business through such a massive transformation. I mean, you look at a company like the New York Times, which is thriving in many ways today. was on the brink, a dozen years ago. And we've all been through so much contingency planning and diversifying of our revenue streams that I think we're in some ways better brave. I mean, we'll see how deep it is. We're not in it yet, but we're not deep in it yet. But I think in some ways companies like ours are more prepared than they were in past downturns. But I cannot see the future.
My last question for you is, you've been the EIC and CEO of Time for 5 years now. Where do you see the company going in the next 5 years? What are your hopes, and what do you think the realities will be?
I said at the beginning that I couldn't have imagined what my career would look like. That my career today, and what my day-to-day life looks like, and the day-to-day life of my colleagues looks like, is totally different from what I would have predicted. This is why I shouldn't do prognostication. Completely different from what I would have guessed in 1992 when I started at the Wall Street Journal. I'm really proud of what we've done and how we've innovated, and the team. And you listed in the introduction all the businesses that we're in today that we weren't in 4 or 5 years ago. I think that we're a completely different company than we were 4 or 5 years ago. And I think for us, I mean, I'll answer the question first from a business perspective, and then I'll go to high altitude. I think for us, the next few years are going to be building on what we built, and we have this new climate division launched 3 months ago. We have our events business that really didn't exist for us a few years ago. We went virtual in the pandemic, as you did. Now back, and so on. I think for us, from a business perspective, the next few years are going to be thinking about all of those new products that are now part of the Time brand, and how we take them out into the market, how we connect them to each other, how we go to our customers. Maybe we have a customer that is an event customer, and talk to them. How do we talk to them about our climate product or our Web3 product or our studios product? That's our next few years as a business. I think that Time, I hope that Time, I believe that Time has a role as a global brand with trust, but also reach. It's amazing to me to think about the cover of the magazine, which, I was a Time magazine family, came to my house as a kid, and but today that cover just travels all over the world, digitally. It's really a digital object. I mean, it's also a print object, but it's an incredible digital vehicle. For me, the most exciting thing, in my career's been on the content side of the business, is the power, the reach that we have at a moment of real crisis in the world, a continuing health crisis, inequality, democracy under threat, a major war going on, many conflicts, but thinking specifically about the nuclear threat and the what's happening in Ukraine, climate crisis. I don't remember when I got out of college, it was the end of history. And we were all going to sail into a peaceful, democratic, globalized, high-growth world. And here we are. So my hope for Time is that as a global brand, we can play a role in bringing solutions and ideas and being a productive, back to your question about polarization, in addressing these crises, in bringing solutions out, as I said, but also I think of Time as a platform that elevates people who are shaping but also improving the world. And so we have our Time 100 community. We have, in the last few years, we started something called Time 100 Next, which is rising stars across every field. We just brought them all together in New York about a week ago. I think we have an opportunity to bring together, through our platforms, but also through our communities, people across every field and from all over the world, to elevate people who are making a difference. And that's really my biggest hope, is that we can be a positive force at a time of a lot of crisis.
Thank you so much. Can everyone join me in giving Mr. Felsenthal a big round of applause? So for the last 15 minutes, we're going to open it up to you guys.
I'm going to get some water, if that's okay.
Yes.
All right.
And there's more over there that I
No,
can
I'm
grab.
good.
But if you guys want to come up to the front, if you have a question, we have 2 microphones set up. So just get up and walk to the front. You guys can form lines behind the mics.
I also meant it when I said if you want to say something or you have ideas about any of the topics that I talked about that are, it doesn't have to be a question. I'd love to hear from you.
Hi, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. My name is Samiksha. I'm a freshman at Princeton, and as a student, we've kind of all seen that media polarization chart that teaches us that every media source is either skewed left or right, and there's bias in every media. And as you mentioned, the diversification of the means of consumption also leads to channels of misinformation and the distortion of the truth. So in this new era of polarization and so many means of media, how do you suppose that the next generation navigate our responsibility to make well-informed decisions and our right to the fact and to truth?
Can I ask you the question? I mean, I'm interested in your view, as a next generation member of society. What can we do to help you and the community around you to, what can we do better in this regard, do you think?
That's really interesting. I would say that polarization is just accelerating in every sense, and I think the next generation is really taught that division is a sign of strength, and being entirely set in what we believe is a sign of power, when power actually comes in collaboration and understanding other viewpoints. And I feel that media today doesn't entirely reflect that value. So I think that's a shift that needs to be made to ensure that we can have a truthful future.
That's great. We ran a book excerpt, a book called The Persuaders, a couple of weeks ago. And the author at the end of our excerpt, the topic is, how do you, it was really about polarization, but kind of focused on, what do you do if your relative or your community colleague or has the facts completely off, is often some kind of misinformation universe. How do you persuade them? And his conclusion was, don't talk about it first. That if you just have the debate, if you just go into, well, you don't understand, or you're wrong, and here's another source, and you go right at the topic, we're doomed. That the way to start bridging these divides is to get people to do things together. I think it's one, I see this in my own hometown community and local community, where there's division, political division, ideological division, but it's not really what people are thinking about. So many people are thinking about in their day-to-day life. They're doing projects together. They're in the community. They're involved in the community in ways that are not necessarily ideological. And so his argument is that at a first level, it's not about the issues. It's about just kind of being with each other in a different space. And I think our media organizations can do some of that. You have events like this. You're from all over the world. That's amazing and important. But we're not the total answer, and I think at the end of the day, the best thing we can do is be constantly thinking about our role in a polarized society, total commitment to the facts, and trying to bring in as many people to those facts as we can.
Thank you so much.
Hi, firstly, thank you for coming. My name is Mark Metrios. I'm a sophomore at the University of Notre Dame studying finance and philosophy. And I was extremely interested in your comment on how your legacy experience as well as your startup experience made you obviously a very valuable asset to Time Magazine. But I was particularly interested in your startup ideas that began at the Wall Street Journal and how you essentially created the personal journal, which is obviously a success now, multiple Pulitzer Prizes. So I'm curious as to how you convinced a legacy journal such as the Wall Street Journal, created in the 19th century, to take on that idea, and how were you able to sort of continue to convince them to follow through with that success?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, it's essentially cultural change, right? Within a place that's 150 years old. The business of the Wall Street Journal was enthusiastic about the idea. Similar, I talked about at Time what to know and what to do. The business leadership of the Wall Street Journal in 2000 it was around 2000, 1999, had recognized they had this incredibly valuable, engaged business audience, people reading the Wall Street Journal to find out how their Verizon stock is doing, for example, but that those people are actually human beings who are trying to figure out what phone to buy. And so the business case was kind of obvious, right? It's like, we've got these people, they're coming every day, we're talking to them about the markets and what's happening inside corporate America and corporate life, corporations all over the world, but we're not speaking to them in their personal lives. So that was the business impetus for Personal Journal. The harder piece, in a way, was internally persuading journalists great journalists who had been doing their coverage a certain way their whole careers. Health was a great example, where there was, when we started Personal Journal, there was a longtime journalist there, now retired, who wrote about, his beat was cardiology and the heart, and he wrote about medical device companies, he wrote about the cardiology world, he covered it as business perspective, but he knew so much, he'd been doing it for so long, like you would almost let him do heart surgery on you, and he had to see that he had this expertise, similar with the people who cover the auto industry. They'd been covering and talk about transformation. They'd been covering the ups and downs of the auto industry, and we were suddenly asking them, well, tell us about the cars, and what's good about the cars and what's bad about the cars, and what should we be on the lookout if I'm buying a car from a company you cover. So that was it wasn't a corporate challenge, it was kind of a cultural challenge, and it was just took a while, and some people never bought in, but most people really, it opened a new door for them, and it was exciting, and for me, it was one of the highlights of my career.
It's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think he was first over here.
Thank you, Mr. Felsenthal. My name is Alex Pavalsky. I'm a sophomore at Yale. I'm also on the Yale Daily News, so I'm interested in journalism. My question is about I grew up reading Time Magazine and really enjoying the long-form pieces about issues affecting Americans, such as the opioid crisis or climate change or gun violence. But as you know, our attention spans are getting, on average, shorter and shorter. And I think a lot of people prefer, or they don't have the time, but they prefer to read tweets that are 140 or 280 characters that may not contain the full context or may not tell the full story, as opposed to reading these 10-page articles that I read as a child, as an adolescent, in Time Magazine. So do you feel like Time as a business is forced to shift toward shorter form pieces, or are you holding tightly to the long form journalism that has shaped your history?
That's a great question. My first day at Time, someone handed me the prospectus that Henry Luce, a Yale Daily News alum, and his co-founder, also a Yale Daily News alum, had written in 1922 or something to get investors so that they could start Time, which they began in 1923. And on that perspective, it says, they're describing how this magazine, all they had in mind was a magazine. Although they were doing movies and other extensions even in the 30s, but at the beginning it was a magazine, and in the prospectus it said no article can be longer than 400 words. So the first take at Time magazine was a short attention span, not all that much. I guess, okay, longer than 140 characters, but, short. So I'm not, I think there's one level at which the consumption of information in digestible bites is part of our heritage, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it if it's done intelligently. I think, I look at what Axios is doing, and I personally find it very useful. It's smart. It's smart brevity, as they call it. Of course, I love the longer form, and we're still doing a lot of it. We ran this week a major investigation of the deaths of migrant workers who were preparing for the upcoming facilities for the upcoming World Cup. In massive heat conditions, and that we're all going to experience in coming years. So we're still investing in long form, not just in print, but we're doing with Trevor Noah, who's the executive producer, a multi-part series with MSNBC called Turning Point. That's hour-long docs that are going deep on. That are the equivalent of long-form written pieces that you might have read when you were a kid reading Time magazine. So I think the answer is both. It's always been both, and it's not something I'm much more worried about content moderation than I am about attention span. Not that it isn't real.
All right, thank you.
And I think we have time for one or two more.
Hi, first of all, thank you for spending time with us all. My name's Sam. I'm a final year philosophy, politics and economics student in the UK. And my question is really more about your career growth. You've come so far in your career now and done so well. And I really wanted to drill down into what you think got you there. Maybe something that, in particular, as there are many things that can lead to it, that you think is undervalued today, something you think that helped you that people don't see now, and then even maybe something that you'd like to keep working on in the next 5 years that will take you even further.
That's a great question. I think, what's been few things have been helpful to me. One is what I had never thought of it this way, but what my boss, our owner, Mark Benioff, talks about, which is a beginner's mind. And as I said, I had a certain conception of what my career would be. And when the first opportunity to divert from that path came, I said no. I mean, instantly, just because why would I get off the path? And then, I slept on it a couple of days, and suddenly I thought, well, this is crazy. I had to try it. And I think, for me, the particularly in a business like ours that's in such a state of disruption, and also a business like ours that I think every business is like this, but there's an attachment to legacy that's hard to separate from, and I think the openness to totally new ideas for your career, the willingness to take risks, calculated risks, both in your career and in your day-to-day work, for me has been, I think, essential, and it's made my career more fun, and it's taken me places that I wouldn't have expected to get. I think, what to work on, so many things. I I think the hardest for me in my daily life is the multitask, and that I feel, when I'm, we all spend so much of our work days now on our laptops, and at any moment I've got 30 tabs open and flipping back and forth between them, and I think just that beginner's mind is important, but focus is important. To quote Mark again, we can do anything, but we can't do everything, and I think a pitfall for all of us in our lives and our jobs and our businesses is when we lose that focus.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we might go over, but just going to do one more quick question.
Hi, yes, thank you. So I'm Roxana Grunenwald, a sophomore at Yale studying philosophy, and I wanted to ask you, I think this brings it back really well to the topic of this year's theme, but time is such a forerunner, a leader in the media and in the journalism industry, and so what are ways in which Time looks to other magazines or other businesses to see where to expand, where to breathe more community into Time, where to improve, and where to go in the future to ensure that Time will continue to be this leader?
Yeah, that's really important, and I think I feel very fortunate to be in an industry. I don't think I know that every industry is not like this, but I feel very fortunate to be in an industry where we are all at some level trying to help each other. Some of that is mission-driven. Most of us who do this for a living or a career come to it because we're attached to the mission. And so maybe it makes us slightly less, act less like sharks to one another. I think some of it is that the transformation in the industry is so massive that we need each other. And so I'm constantly speaking to, one of the things that's interesting about, I spent 15 years at the Wall Street Journal, loved it. And we talk, there's a, the people that I worked with at the Journal over those 50 years are now scattered across media. Some of them have left media, but many of them are scattered across media to places that are now competitors, in theory, to the Journal or to Time. But we do talk to each other a lot, and I'm constantly asking my peers, as are my colleagues, asking their peers, how should we think about story length, to the previous question? How should we think about frequency in print? What's more important digitally, subscribers or advertising? Do you want to encourage, how important is the size of your digital audience versus the makeup of your digital audience in terms of your ability to connect readers to advertisers, audience to advertisers? There are so many models in our business because it continues to be in a state of incredible disruption. We have, I look at other brands in our industry and see things that I wish we were doing that they're doing. A lot of our, we've got this amazing Time Studios, and they're looking at us and saying, well, how'd you do that? So that is a essential part of how companies like ours get from here to there, in my view.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we're running over, so I think we're going to have to end it here. You guys have stuff to do and don't want to cause everything else in the day to run a couple minutes behind. But again, if everyone could just give a round of applause.
Thank you all. And before you go, just following up on my invitation to send ideas, my email address is edward@time.com, so not hard to remember, and feel free to reach out anytime. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much for joining us today.